All right. Welcome to part two of podcast number one, the first podcast of Team Stronger Together. That first part, I was introducing myself a little bit, and then we really went into why and how our education system, mostly why our education system needs to be changed, and uh, what we can do for that system to make things better for our kids, for our parents, for our families, for our communities. The second part is going to really focus on the foundation for what we're talking about here in this podcast, which is life skills for a lifetime. All right. And what do I need to do to get better at anything? Like, how do I gain a skill? Exactly, right? I have to practice it. And I can't just practice it once in a while. I need to really practice it on the daily. And none of this has to do with perfection or being better at it than somebody or being like really perfect at it, or comparing myself. Nothing like that. All it is am I willing to each day do what's a little bit uncomfortable or maybe a lot of bit uncomfortable and just get a little bit better at it each day. And just by that compound effect of each day getting a little bit better as something that's going to benefit me now and for the rest of my life in all areas of my life, whether it's, relationships, uh, building up my community, my career, the business I want to own or run, any of that stuff, athletics, my just performance in anything. These are the foundational skills. So I want to have two guests. First one is Jason Mayden. I don't need to introduce him because Tom Bilyeu, who does the Impact Theory podcast that I really like, he does a way dope job of introducing Jason Mayden. And then I'm going to do a little bit about something that we can all do, like not as a challenge, like I'm better than you, but just a challenge for all of us to get better at these foundational skills. And then we'll have Koya Webb and Sean Stevenson talk about uh, another life skill. All right. But this first one, Jason Maiden really gives vocabulary to emotional intelligence and how it helped him be who he is today, he's amazing. All right, here we go.
Today's guest grew up on the south side of Chicago amid unimaginable violence and dreamed of one day working at Nike designing shoes for his hero Michael Jordan. Virtually everyone told him that this dream was ridiculous for somebody like him, but he refused to listen, making his mom take him to shoe stores, not so he could buy something, but so he could sketch the shoes and see if he could improve on them. Nothing came easily for him, but just as Jordan put up 1,000 shots a day to improve, he began doing 1,000 sketches a day. He persisted, and after several rejections, he got a design internship with Nike, becoming the first African American to do so. Insanely hungry to make a name for himself, he took all of the projects nobody else wanted. His assignment to reinvent laces, the most boring job in shoes, was actually meant to haze him, but he crushed it so hard that it resulted in him being awarded multiple patents and attracting the attention of Nike founder Phil Knight. He also poured himself completely into another maligned and orphaned project known as the Barbecue Shoe for Dad.
You guys know what I'm talking about. The Monarch, oh my God.
And turned it into the Monarch, the highest grossing shoe in Nike's history. While it normally takes roughly 15 years to become a senior designer at Nike, he did it in 5. He went on to design shoes for Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Eminem, and of course, the king himself, Michael Jordan. Not satisfied with being a great designer, however, he went back to school and received his master's degree in business from Stanford. And when he returned to Nike, he worked his way all the way to senior global design director for the Jordan brand. So please, help me in welcoming the real-life Lucius Fox, the media designer at Stanford's D School and CEO of Superheroic, Jason Mayden.
I think, there's several things that I fundamentally believe are true in terms of difficulty and what it gives you. So for me, being born on the south side of Chicago in a blue collar environment, you don't make excuses for yourself. There's no such thing as anyone starts life, behind the start line. I look at myself as equal to everyone that I'm in a room with, and the separation between where I want to go and where I am is my work ethic. So my mindset is always that anybody can be great. I want to be the greatest ever at what I do. So everything I touch, everything I pour my time and talent into, I don't think about being great. I think about how can I be the greatest, and that takes a huge amount of introspection. It takes a huge amount of self-reflection and honesty. And it also takes humility because you have to ask for help in order to be the greatest.
Those are all emotional intelligence skills. I All right. Anyway, my bad. But I'm gonna run that little bit by again a little bit. All right. I love him. He's amazing. All right, here we go. Let's keep going. I won't stop it again, I don't think.
Believe are true in terms of difficulty and what it gives you. So for me, being born on the south side of Chicago in a blue collar environment, you don't make excuses for yourself. There's no such thing as anyone starts life, behind the start line. I look at myself as equal to everyone that I'm in a room with, and the separation between where I want to go and where I am is my work ethic. So my mindset is always that anybody can be great. I want to be the greatest ever at what I do. So everything I touch, everything I pour my time and talent into, I don't think about being great. I think about how can I be the greatest, and that takes a huge amount of introspection. It takes a huge amount of self-reflection and honesty. And it also takes humility because you have to ask for help in order to be the greatest. So
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody say that before. It takes humility to be the greatest.
It does.
Interesting.
I take so many notes on him. You should be too.
That there's a difference between a response and a reaction. A reaction is very emotionally driven. It's not calculated. It's not thoughtful. A response is strategic. It's intentional, and it's meant to have a person understand your true, disposition.
How did you learn to deal with suffering, which is something you've talked about, like being necessary to get across the finish line?
I encountered suffering at a very early age, at the age of 7, when I was in the hospital with septicemia, which is a severe blood infection. And it was at that time in the hospital where I had to play with children who were terminally ill, children who were in intensive care, children who weren't going home. And I realized, there's always someone who is going through more than you. There's always someone that has, real significant problems while you may have an inconvenience. And so while I looked at myself as having a challenge, a health challenge, and suffering, I still felt that was just an inconvenience. It was something that I can overcome. So I look at suffering as a way to keep me humble because, when you think about the archetype of a superhero, they always have an obstacle to overcome. There's always the height of climax. And I don't believe that I'm so great that I don't, have the ability to go through difficult circumstances. I think it's necessary in order to realize your greatness. Because when you're tested, you are given the ability to have a testimony. So you can't have a testimony without a test. And just, in my life, I've been tested significantly. And each time, I've developed a new skill set or a new muscle to help me run this race. If you look at historically people that have been masters in various disciplines, they all had one thing in common: curiosity. And curiosity is something that starts at childhood, but is stripped from you as you grow older because they tell you, pick a lane, focus on this, become that. And we subscribe to labels people place on us, and that limits our potential. So I just fundamentally believe that I don't let someone else place their limits on me. My limit is the limit I set, and I believe I'm limitless. I believe that if you have a life and you don't, utilize it and you settle for just being average, and that's a waste of the gift of life. Like every day I wake up, when people ask me, how you doing? I say, man, I'm thankful I woke up today, because that's the first gift you're given, is another chance to be great. So, I think, like you mentioned, people who are multidisciplinary, people who are curious and inquisitive, the reason why they become great is because they don't believe that they truly have mastered their craft. They don't feel settled in what they've developed. They don't feel as if they're the best just yet. Because they may be more talented, they may be smarter, but they won't outwork me. Because that's where excellence comes from. It's the small things done well consistently over time. And it's never the smartest, it's the person who runs the hardest and who doesn't quit that wins. And I'm just willing to push myself and, break down my own insecurities to build up my confidence and my skill set.
Did you ever meet Tim Grover?
Tim Grover is who trained Michael Jordan and Kobe.
I did, yeah, one time.
So Tim, in his book Relentless, and I've had the very good fortune of meeting him and interviewing him, and he was the first person that really talked about the darkness. Like I've seen so much footage on you can't imagine, and you are so upbeat and positive and bright and sunny. And when you're with your family, oh my God, like it just literally, it pours out of you. But there's like, you're so driven. Do you have like a foot in like the darkness? Do you know like how to balance? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it actually, you have to have both. So if there's extreme darkness, there has to be extreme light. It's duality to everything. So I just tend to bias towards what I want to see in the world more, what I want to see more in the world, which is joyfulness, which is being present, which is being, thankful. And so that's what drives me. It's the things people told me I couldn't become. It's the negative circumstances that I come from. I don't let that limit me at all. That's my catalyst. Because I look at it like, okay, why not me? I've already overcome this. Why can't I go and start a company? Why can't I build something that's meaningful? Why can't I create this new paradigm shift in the way we look at the world as big, giant superhero training facility? Because if I looked at it the other way and started to take, the count of, okay, well, I can't do this because of where I come from. I can't do this because of how I look. I can't do this. I wouldn't start anything. Everybody would wake up each day doing subtraction. I look at my life as addition. I wake up and say, what can I do today to add to my skill set? What can I do today to add to someone else's joy? What can I do today to serve someone else? So when you keep a mindset of service, your problems in that darkness become smaller because you're not going to focus on your own insecurities, your own problems. You're going to figure out a way to amplify someone else's experience. So I go through life looking at people as an opportunity for me to serve. Because while I'm waiting on my blessing, I can be a blessing. And that's how I counterbalance that. When you focus solely on your darkness, everything becomes about you. You become selfish, and you could be driven to a point where it becomes toxic. And that's why you see some people implode once they get to where they're going, because they look up and no one around them really wants them there. For me, I have this mentality that if everyone around me is fed and no one is starving, then I don't have to worry about people being villainous or hungry and trying to take from me. So the way I feed is through time, through joyfulness, through good energy, because sometimes all you need to do is tell a person that they matter and show up. That's the greatest gift, is to acknowledge people in the world that's so busy and so hurried. To slow down and be present and to acknowledge a person's existence is, to me, how you balance out the darkness with the light when you're driven.
So it says here, emotional intelligence is a skill. It's a set of skills. And once again, our education system has the ability to teach these skills on the daily. We need to force that to happen, because it's obviously not going to happen. It's just not going to happen without us as the community, as parents, as students. Students, oh my goodness. This is your opportunity to make your voice like not just heard, but acted upon. All right. And that's what we're going for with the Team Stronger Together podcast. All right. I'm going to show Koya Webb and her dope skill building, how to face your fears. But first, this is a challenge. Once again, not a challenge like I'm better than you or you're going to fail or whatever. No, it's a challenge for all of us to start building daily habits, small ones that turn into like consistent ones. All right. And it's really broken into 4 areas, and there's no judgment zone. Just I'm asking each of us to kind of each day keep track of how we're doing. Did I try? Okay. And I'm going to give you the 4 things. One is practicing breath work. All right. Did I notice that I'm breathing through my nose all day? These are lessons that I have that you can DM me for. I'll send them to you. All of these are separate lessons, so that you can learn the skill. DM or email me. I'll get them to you. But the first one is breath work. All right. The second one is a combination of stuff that really helps our body, because our physiology has everything to do with our mental health. It has everything to do with our outlook. Okay. Are you drinking water? Are you exercising? This is not about body type. This is not about looking cut or swole or, like amped up, or just not. It's about my mental health and my physical health. All right. So drinking water, exercising, getting quality sleep as close to 8 hours and feeling rested as possible every day, and trying to do good in terms of eating, like vegetables and fruit as much as possible, and way less stuff out of bags, way less stuff out of boxes. All right. The third one is gratitude, and it's partly, making lists of gratitude. That's cool, but it's really the power of living in gratitude, which is not just writing lists. All right, it's not just making notes, but it's how much appreciation am I showing to people each day? How much am I willing to focus on what's possible as opposed to what's not possible? All right. Those are just some aspects of that. And once again, this is a lesson that you can get from me for just DM or email. And the fourth one is how much am I catching myself when I'm being negative? All right. Negative thoughts, they happen all the time. That's part of the deal of being a human being. But speaking on those negative thoughts and acting on those negative thoughts is a whole other deal. So, getting good at catching myself when I start complaining, getting good at catching myself when I start speaking negatively about myself, when I start speaking negatively about others, all right, when I start speaking negatively about my situation. How good am I willing to get at catching myself that stuff, doing that stuff? And notice I didn't say, oh, just go be positive, be more positive. I didn't say that. I said, catch myself being negative because the research shows when I can eliminate my negativity as much as possible, that opens me up. And when I practice gratitude, that opens me up to possibilities, to opportunities. All right. And the willingness to be uncomfortable. They all go hand in hand. All right. So, and as I was talking on those of you that are watching this, there's a picture up. It's a graphic that like gives you the ability to each day check off, and I can send it to you. Check off that I practice this just for a little bit. But that whole thing about being negative, what I'm not talking about is speaking up and taking action for social justice. That's important. That's not complaining. That's not being negative. That's calling out and taking action on what needs to happen, and we'll cover some social justice stuff towards the end of the podcast. All right. Now I want to move into the second guest for this part of the podcast, and her name is Koya Webb, and her IG information is going to be at the end of the third part of the podcast. She's on Sean Stevenson's Model Health Show podcast, super dope. But facing our fears is such a important, crucial skill. And this happens to be, she wrote a book called Your Fears Make You Fierce. And these are a couple of the fears that we need to learn how to overcome.
The world needs everything each and every one of us has, else we wouldn't have been created. We are all so necessary, and we're necessary at the highest version of ourselves, and so it's not really about comparison or worrying about what it is or what it isn't or what it should be or what should you do, asking other people. It's really about doing the internal dialogue. What is it for me right now? And I think if we always go within to work things out instead of looking outside of ourselves, we'll be led and guided to our exact path that we need to be doing on this earth. And no one else knows it. So even when I teach, I tell people, I'm sharing my story so that you will be inspired. But I don't expect you to do everything that I'm doing. Like every little thing, it's like you have to find out what works for you. And hopefully I give you enough tools that you can try a couple out and keep the ones that you like and toss the ones that you don't. But realize that this is a personal journey we have. And when we bring people into our lives, they're helping us. They're also challenging us in ways that we need to be challenged to grow and evolve. But it's all a process of us becoming the best version of ourselves. It's all a process of us truly enjoying life as us, not anyone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a great segue to the third fear. Mm-hmm. And if we could talk about this quickly, fear of change.
Oh, yeah. Well, the only constant thing in life is change. So I don't understand, why we fear it so much. But the only thing constant in life, everything in life changes. And we get into jobs, we get into relationships, even with ourselves. And you're like, I don't ever want to change. I always want to feel this. Well, the constant thing is you're going to feel sadness. You're going to feel pain. in our own selves, and we're also going to feel it in our relationships, in our jobs. You're going to go through this ebb and flow, and the more you resist, what? The more it persists. So the more you're like, I don't want it, the more you're gonna feel it, and you're gonna have to breathe through it, because it's just teaching you the lesson for peace. And that's the thing we all want: world peace. How does world peace happen? Well, it starts inside. How can you have peace? Stop resisting change, because change is inevitable. It's gonna happen. And so when these things happen, just asking the question, what is this trying to show me? What is this trying to tell me? How is this leading me towards love? Because if love is all there is and fear is an illusion, then even the fearful stuff, even the hard stuff, even the seemingly bad thing is still a journey towards love. And that's what I truly believe.
Love it, love it. And the final one, and again, there's so much more laid out in the book, but just to have this framework of these various fears. And I was actually surprised to see this one, because I was kind of scanning before I even got to it, because sometimes your consciousness can jump ahead a little bit,
Right.
and so I was like thinking about what would the fourth one be, and then to see this one, I was surprised, but then it was like, yeah, this makes sense. So it's fear of being the first.
Yes. And if you've ever been the first in something, then you can really relate to this. But actually, we all are the first in something, because we're the first version of ourselves. Even if you're a twin, you're the first version of yourself. And people are afraid to be first. That's why we're so afraid to be themselves. And that's an uncommon one. But I realized that after a lot of study, it's just like, if you think about it, you're like, if you're the first one to go to college, you're afraid because you don't have anyone to look at. You don't have a template to follow. So what do you have to do? You have to figure yourself out. You have to do the internal work. We are the first people. We are the first, in everything that we do, because we are the ones. So what does that take? Internal thinking and self-assessment, which is what the book is, just what are the top 10 things that you like? What are your goals? All that needs to happen on a weekly basis, even on a daily basis sometimes when you're changing a lot. But I think the fear of being first is what holds most people back. They're looking for an example that they can follow, that they can latch on to. They say, okay, if this worked for them, then it can work for me. And that's beautiful. It's very beautiful to be inspired. And it's very beautiful to look on social media and look online and have inspirations. But again, inspirations, not necessarily a template, because unless you realize that, there are going to be some differences. And I think when people are afraid to be the first at something, it holds them back. They're like me, like I'm a perfectionist. So perfectionist breeds procrastination, and you never put it out there because you think, I want it just like this. It has to be, I have to say the perfect thing, and I have to look perfect, and everything has to be perfect. And until it's perfect, I can't do it. And you're just holding back all that beauty from the world, all the beauty of who you really are, all the beauty of what you can really do, because you're trying to be perfect, or you're trying to be like someone else. But if you're not trying to be perfect, and you're not trying to be like someone else, then you will not have the fear of being first. You will go forth knowing that the world needs exactly what you have, exactly the way you have to share it. Whether it's quirky or funny or weird or loud or soft or whatever, the world needs it just like that, because as you said before, someone can relate to it. And then someone will be inspired to be their quirky, unique, amazing self. And I think that's what, the fear of being first is all about. It's just not being afraid to be you.
So for those of you that are listening and not looking at this, it says, think about how many times Koya Webb spoke about the courage to be yourself, the courage to be ourselves, to be you, right? Man. So face your fears. We have the power. All right. Now, let's move in to another part. This is actually the last part of this part 2 of our first podcast, social justice. This is going to be such an important part of our podcast. But for this first one, I want to lay the foundation for what really needs to happen for there to be any, for real change, any lasting change. And for that to happen, I promise you, it is rooted in emotional intelligence skills, mental wellness skills. And once again, as a system, we do not teach them. And therefore, We are running around doing the same things that we've been doing as a society. Maybe a little bit better here, but not so much better there. Maybe a more improvement here. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, the things are better in some ways, in other ways, they're not. All right. And I'm not just focusing on the negatives to be negative. I'm saying that no, we're nowhere near close where we can be as a country, as a community, as schools, even as families, to where we should be and can be if we all get up on game on emotional intelligence skills. All right. So, this is Dr. Huberman, once again, my man, and he is going to, for about, I think, 10 minutes, talk about what needs to take place before we can even like really do this stuff, as my kids are having fun while we're doing the podcast. All right, here we go.
But I think that short of having people buffer their lives with tons of activities and perfect nutrition and perfect social interactions, people learning to control their autonomic nervous system, I think, is really the next step in our species evolution.
I'm going to run this back again. This is everything. Breath work, meditation, learning how to make myself able to listen to stuff I don't want to listen to, or new ways of thinking, or things that make me uncomfortable. This is everything. So this is what he's talking about. So here we go. Thank you, Dr. Huberman. I don't think I'm going to stop this again. Here we go.
But I think that short of having people buffer their lives with tons of activities and perfect nutrition and perfect social interactions, people learning to control their autonomic nervous system, I think, is really the next step in our species evolution. I really believe that what we are seeing now in the world is a call to arms, if you will, or a request from Mother Nature to have everybody learn how to control their autonomic nervous system a little bit better, or ideally a lot better.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, I think. I mean, right now, irrespective of what's going on with the pandemic and the political climate and the protests and all the upheaval that we're seeing, as a culture, we're experiencing an extraordinary poverty of attention and focus. We're so distracted by our devices. We're more anxious and stressed and depressed than we ever have been before. This is not going in a good direction. And to the extent that we can commandeer a little bit more control over these things and understand that we have some level of agency and we can reverse this sort of automatic pattern that we're on of just scrolling endlessly and doing what we're doing that we know is not leading us in a good direction, is critical if we're going to find our way forward. And to speak a little bit to what's going on right now, I think and it's related, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the neuroscience that is I think relevant to this, is that we've lost the ability to have civil discourse. There's a real breakdown in communication right now, culturally and socially, and it's fractured our society, and it's not good, right? So what is going on neurologically with human beings that are attaching themselves and so self-identifying with certain narratives that it's polarizing our population and preventing us from being able to just be together or united or agree upon what is true and what is not true and share a value system so that we can see our way through the challenges that we're facing right now, which many of which are an existential threat to the future of humanity and the planet.
It's a huge problem. You articulated it beautifully, and I think neuroscience can offer a couple insights into why it's happening and perhaps what we might do about it. So one of the scientific results that I'm very intrigued by is in the 1960s, a guy named Robert Heath recorded from the human brain. These are people, you couldn't do this experiment nowadays, but skull popped off. My neurosurgery friends tell me that's no big deal. Electrodes lowered deep into the brain, all over the brain, and people can stimulate wherever they want. And they just report what they're feeling. So they press one lever, they feel drunk. They press another lever, they feel happy. They press another lever, they feel sexually aroused. And they're reporting all this, right?
When was this done?
In the 1960s, early 1960s. Several times, actually, and published twice essentially the same data, different populations in the journal Science, which is sort of our Super Bowl, Science and Nature, Cell. Those are the big ones, journals, that is. So the number one brain area that people want to stimulate, they finally hit this lever where they go, oh, I like that. And they just keep hitting that thing and hitting that thing and hitting that thing. Frustration and mild anger.
Uh-huh.
And I saw that
That's
result.
the choice. I could be drunk. I could be happy. I'm going to choose frustration and anger.
Exactly.
Wow.
What that told us is it's clearly tapped into the dopamine reward system. It feels like a hit of dopamine to them more than anything else. So we need to put that on the shelf and keep it visible as we kind of march into this a sort of answer to your question. The other thing is an understanding that, and there's some recent data on this that are really impressive, not from my lab, but from another lab, which is that beliefs and information that supports our prior beliefs also increases the activity of these reward systems. So the more I see stuff that verifies what I already think or feel, that they are bad and they are good, or that we are good and they are bad, the more dopamine and adrenaline is released into my system, which we now know from our discussion a few minutes ago changes the way I view the world. It actually changes the way I view the world. It means that I'm going to see certain things and not see others. And this also relates to the auditory system. I'm going to hear certain things and not hear others. The things that verify.
I'm going to run this back a little bit, like a little bit of it. But I want me to think in terms of all of us, so what he's saying is that I am actually seeking to verify what I already believe because that makes me feel good. So if I don't like school, I'm going to seek things to verify why I don't like school. And that makes me, in a weird way, feel good. Okay? And it could be anything. All right? But I just wanted to narrow that down, not narrow it down, but expand it rather into all areas of our life. We're talking about social justice right now, but it has everything to do with why it is so difficult to make changes and why, as this podcast is going to keep emphasizing, emotional intelligence skills are super crucial. All right. So let's run that back a little bit from Dr. Huberman, this little part. I don't know if I'm going to catch it right where I catch it. So he's going to put that on the shelf about, that was crazy, about mild anger and frustration being stuff that we actually seek also, that we like how that feels. Crazy. All right, here we go.
That on the shelf and keep it visible as we kind of march into this a sort of answer to your question. The other thing is an understanding that, and there's some recent data on this that are really impressive, not from my lab, but from another lab, which is that beliefs and information that supports our prior beliefs also increases the activity of these reward systems. So the more I see stuff that verifies what I already think or feel, that they are bad and they are good, or that we are good and they are bad, the more dopamine and adrenaline is released into my system, which we now know from our discussion a few minutes ago changes the way I view the world. It actually changes the way I view the world. It means that I'm going to see certain things and not see others. And this also relates to the auditory system. I'm going to hear certain things and not hear others. The things that verify my beliefs I'm going to feel rewarded for. The things that are counter to my beliefs, I'm not going to be as rewarded for. So we have all these barricades to empathy and to really listening and to really hearing what the other side is trying to say. And we have all these support networks in our body and our brain, which are building a bigger and bigger divide. Now, that's all very depressing. So the question is, what's the boat that's going to get us across that divide? And I believe, and I'm not just defaulting to this because it's what my lab works on, but I fundamentally believe that the boat that's going to get us to the other side is our ability to control our internal state, to be able to ratchet down our level of autonomic arousal just enough so that I can dilate not just my vision of what's happening in my immediate environment, but I can dilate my cognition, my thinking, to the possibility that there may be a kernel of value in what somebody else is saying, even if it's about me and I don't like what I'm hearing. Now, as somebody who spent time in the addiction treatment community, you probably know this is a lot of what you get good at as you learn to move through something that to you feels very good. And you know all the reasons why it would probably be good to change it, but you know what? You don't want to, because it feels so good. So we're talking about an addiction to entrenched thinking. We're talking about an addiction and neurochemical systems that support lack of change, my refusal to change, and stubbornness. And I actually think, just like for the treatment of addiction and trauma, the key is to get people to learn to tolerate progressively higher levels of stress and maintain dilation of sensory experience, of thought experience. We've got to create some small little portals through which information can come in. A lot's been made of mirror neurons. I hate to break it to the crowd, but the data in support of mirror neurons in humans is not that impressive. And now the mirror neuron people are going to come after me, but fine. There are circuits in the brain that control emotional contagion, and those are what's powerful. My ability to recruit you into stress is much more powerful than my ability to recruit you into empathy for something good. That's a well-established neurobiological fact.
Or empathy for someone's perspective that I'm fundamentally going to disagree with.
Right. So I think there are 3 gates to getting there. And by there, I think I'm referring vaguely to the idea that we need to increase our level of understanding, at least our level of discourse, so that we can really hear other people's ideas, even though we don't like the way it feels, and we love the way that we feel. This is what that result said. We love the way we feel. We don't like the way other people feel. The first thing is to bring the level of urgency that we feel internally down. We need to learn to calm ourselves in order to really have the information start to come in. Now, the system right now and people out there, everyone's in a frenzy. And you can see it. The collective conscience is kind of losing its mind. It's kind of out of its mind. We need to learn how to turn off those amygdala circuits. So are we all going to get together and do EMDR? Probably not. Are we all going to get together and do breathing exercises? Probably not at scale. What we need to do is start to figure out how we can, I think, especially for the next generation of kids, how to teach them to regulate their nervous system so that they recognize that pulse of adrenaline as placing them in a compromised position. Like, we have to leverage the idea that being able to hear and listen hinges on the ability to be calm. So therefore, the ability to be calm is crucial to hearing and hearing and listening is crucial to our advancement as individuals and as groups. The problem is everyone's been trying to do this backwards. They've said we all have to get along. We have to cancel culture. We all have to, listen to one another. And I think, again, we have to start from the inside. We have to teach it physiologically. Now, I don't have a master plan on how to do that, but one of the reasons I'm here and one of the reasons I'm teaching neuroscience on Instagram and not just in my laboratory is until we can learn to regulate the self, I don't think we're going to get where we want to go as a culture. I think it really does start with our own individual ability to do that. And so, David's a really good example, for instance, of somebody who learned how to deal with his own internal mess and build something beautiful out of that. And he continues to do that. And
he's speaking about David Goggins, the world-renowned ultimate runner, ultimate fitness person, and all he went through as a young person and has overcome a lot of that and turned his life into, helping others. All right.
Everyone's got to find that process for themselves. And whether or not you have a perfect family or whether or not you consider yourself the most inclusive and accepting person in the world or not, everyone needs to learn how to do that for themselves. And everyone thinks we do it pretty well, but I think it's clear that none of us do it well enough. So autonomic arousal, autonomic control, I think those are the entry points for addiction, for trauma, and for really empathic hearing and listening. And until we do that, I think our species is going to continue to go around this merry-go-round, where every 50 or 100 years we crash right up against the same general set of issues, only now social media has made it a lot more complicated.
Like, we obviously need organizational, institutional, and systemic changes. We need to change the way these social media platforms work, the way in which we're delivered information, and the way in which we're siloed. But I don't have any control over any of those things. The only thing I have control over is my own internal mechanism. So what other choice do we have?
Well, I think we need people in positions of power and leadership who are very good at internal control. I think emotions are great. I experience them often intensely, but
congratulations.
Thank you. They're not always wonderful to experience, but I think it's clear that the level of autonomic arousal that's associated with emotions, either very high or very low, very happy or very sad, very anxious or very angry, clouds our judgment. It's very clear, and I think the sooner
we give them too much credence too. They're just feelings, man. Like, we don't have to allow them to overtake us and monopolize everything that we do.
They were designed to push us along certain behavioral paths, but they've grown in importance in the last few years. And we could get into a discussion about how social media marketing are designed to capture these very deep limbic aspects of ourselves, and they are. But what's amazing is, and important, is that everybody has a forebrain. Some people's, it seems, is more developed than others, but everybody has one, and we have this capacity for what we call top-down control, which is the ability to intervene in our own feeling states and our own action states.
Right, and no one's minimizing feelings or emotions or discounting them. It's simply that we have elevated, once again, we have normalized symptoms. We have normalized, all the things that go along with the feelings, but we haven't normalized what I can do to intervene when I'm feeling so sad or so angry or so hurt or so, upset or so can't believe right? So that's all he's saying. That's all we're talking about in this section. Now, let's keep moving on really quick. One last short one. And there's this whole concept of that's out there, that there's no reason for like white people to feel guilty about racism or the past or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to really get into that during this podcast. We will. But what I want to get into is that to lay the foundation, there's a huge difference between shame and guilt. Shame is totally not productive. It's counterproductive. It's whack. It's not okay. All right. Guilt, however, I'm not talking about living in guilt and staying in guilt. I'm just talking about that there's a difference between guilt and shame, and guilt can be very, very constructive and productive when used properly. And I want to use Dr. Brene Brown. She's going to talk just for a couple minutes about the difference between shame and guilt, and we're going to use this to inform the rest of our podcast in the social justice realm.
The thing about shame that's so hard to talk about is we have a visceral response to the word. And shame is not a, let's study this and talk about those people who have it. Like, you have it, I have it, and no one wants to talk about it.
So define it. Is it what we all think shame is?
It's, by definition, I think what emerged from the data for me is it's the deeply painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and somehow unworthy of connection, love, and belonging.
And everybody experiences this.
Everybody. It's a universal emotion.
Is it different from guilt?
Very different from guilt. So shame is really a focus on self, while guilt seems to be a focus on behavior. So shame, I am bad. Guilt, I did something bad. So just an example. I'm your teacher and I give you your test back and you get a 47 out of 100. Shame self-talk would be, God, I'm so stupid, I'm an idiot. Guilt self-talk would be, God, it was really stupid not to study for that. Man, not a good idea to go out last night. When we can focus on behavior, we are much more likely to respond with empathy and actually change. But it's like, one of the questions I get from parents all the time is like, my kid lied to me. And so I looked at my kid and I said, you're a liar. And that's very shaming, right? You're a liar. Not, you told a lie and that's unacceptable and here are the consequences for telling a lie. When we call ourselves or other people liars or losers or, stupid, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where do you go from there? As opposed to, look, you're a great kid. but you lied, and that's completely not okay. And here are the consequences for lying. And if it happens again, here are the consequences. So when we are able to separate a focus on self and a focus on behavior, we're much more likely to be able to change the behavior. If we catch one of our kids saying, God, I'm so stupid, when they're doing their homework, no. You can say, God, I'm confused, I'm lost, I don't know what's happening. But I'm stupid is not going to work. We just don't talk to each other or ourselves like that in this house.
So, just to recap for the social justice part of this, we have got to build, we all have to practice the ability, the skills of how to prepare myself to listen with empathy and listen to different points of view in a way where I'm going to actually receive it and consider it. Okay? Yelling at each other has not worked. Threatening each other definitely doesn't work. Shaming each other doesn't work. Okay? Next podcast, next week, I have a story, just personal story regarding social justice and guilt and all that stuff. And I don't know, I just wanted to lay the groundwork for further discussions on this because we've been discussing it for centuries and centuries, and we've gotten to a certain point. But to get to where we need to go, we're going to need to do what Dr. Huberman said, which is practice the emotional intelligence skills of self-awareness and breath work and empathy, all of that stuff, as well as what Dr. Brown is saying, that no, guilt, to a certain degree is helpful and pushes me towards wanting to do the right thing. It points to having a value system also. All right. People that don't feel guilt about anything ever don't really have values that they live by. They're just like, oh, okay, whatever. Okay. And once again, this is not living in guilt or letting guilt hold me back. Or again, it's definitely not about shame. So I hope that lays the groundwork. That's where we're going to be operating from. All right. So that's the end of part 2. All right. Peace.